The peak of Yurei, or Japanese ghosts, occurred during the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, when the Japanese were fascinated by mysterious storytelling sessions called Haikyuu Monogatari Kaidankai. Participants would sit in a circle and take turns telling stories. 100 candles were lit, and each one was extinguished after a story ended. The room grew increasingly dim, creating an eerie atmosphere. To gather more tales for the Haikyuu Monogatari Kaidankai, the Japanese would diligently search every dark corner, excavate suspicious-looking stones half-buried in temple grounds, and implore their elders to recount ancient, half-remembered stories. Some of these tales were chilling and captivating. They featured deceased lovers returning from the grave, processions of ghosts descending into the underworld, and malevolent spectral hands, among other eerie occurrences. This time, let me introduce you to 10 of the most well-known ghost stories in Japan. The Ghost of Oyuki is perhaps the most famous and influential ghost painting in Japan. It serves as the archetype of a yurei, or ghost, in the Japanese psyche. The image of a pale-faced girl with long black hair, clad in a white kimono, was already present in folklore, but this particular rendition, especially with its lack of feet, was immortalized by Moriyama Kiyo. Although commonly known as The Ghost of Oyuki, the original Japanese title is Hireizu, Oyuki no Maboroshi, loosely translated as Yurei Image, the apparition of Oyuki. According to a note found in a historical document, possibly transcribed by a former owner named Shimizu, the young artist had a lover named Oyuki, a geisha at the Tominaga restaurant in Tsu City, Mie Province, now Shiga Prefecture. Oyuki died young, but the note does not mention the cause or time of her death. However, Kiyo was deeply saddened by her passing. In 1750, during the Edo period, Moriyama Kiyo awoke one night to find a young woman floating at the foot of his bed. She was beautiful, with an otherworldly pallor radiating from her pure white funeral kimono, contrasting sharply with her jet-black eyes and disheveled hair cascading over her shoulders. She had no feet. The ghost lingered only briefly before vanishing. Moriyama immediately rose from his bed and captured Oyuki's likeness as she had appeared before him. Moriyama was renowned for his realistic depictions, so much so that if he painted something, people believed he had truly seen it. Due to his reputation, when Moriyama exhibited the painting and recounted the story, the Japanese public did not doubt that it depicted a real yurei. From then on, they held the image in reverence. In the town of Izuwakamatsu, now Fukushima Prefecture, there lived a man named Iyo and his wife. One night, the ghost of a woman appeared in their home. At first, the unfamiliar woman, who had already passed away, appeared in their garden. She knocked on the tightly closed door and called out Iyo's wife's name, who was sleeping next to him. Known for her seriousness and decisiveness, Iyo's wife boldly responded, "Who are you, and what do you want?" But there was no reply, only the continuous calling of her name by the yurei. Prepared for such a situation, Iyo's wife retrieved a special box she kept near their futon and took out an ofuda, a strip of paper imbued with protective charms and incantations by a local monk. She hurled the ofuda at the ghost, causing it to vanish like smoke. However, the ghost persisted in haunting Iyo and his wife. The next evening, she appeared in their kitchen, manifesting from the flames in the stove. Later, she appeared again in the garden, circling around and ringing a bell with a wooden clapper. This continued for 4 days. Realizing they couldn't ward off the ghost, Iyo's wife visited a shrine to pray to the Buddha and implore the gods to protect their home. She fervently prayed to the spirits, and that night, their house remained peaceful. The ghost did not reappear. It was the 8th day since the ghost's first appearance. Clearly, Iyo's wife's protection was effective for only 1 night. This time, the female spectre appeared directly in their bedroom, floating above their bed. She then descended and began stroking Iyo's wife's feet with her cold, lifeless hands. At this point, Iyo and his wife could no longer endure it and immediately moved out. The mysterious, malevolent woman ghost remains an enigma to this day. No one in Iyo's family had ever encountered her before, nor did they know her intentions or the reason for her appearance. In the capital, there lived a poor samurai who was suddenly summoned to serve a lord in a distant land. Eagerly accepting the offer, he abandoned his wife to live with another woman for many long years. Once his duty to the lord was fulfilled, the samurai returned to the capital and suddenly found himself longing for his former wife. That night, he arrived at their old home where they had once lived together. It was midnight and the cold moonlight illuminated the house. The gate was already open. He entered and found his wife sitting quietly alone. But she showed no signs of anger or resentment towards her husband for abandoning her. Instead, she greeted him warmly and welcomed him back after the long separation. Touched by her forgiveness, the samurai vowed to never part from her again. Content with his wife's happiness, he embraced her until they both fell asleep. The next morning, the samurai was awakened by the bright morning sun shining throughout the house, even brighter than the moonlight of the previous night. As he looked at himself, he realized that instead of embracing his wife, he was holding onto a dry corpse, with only bits of flesh clinging to the skeleton wrapped in long black hair. He jumped up and rushed to the neighboring house, asking, "What happened to the woman living next door?" She was abandoned by her unfaithful husband and fell ill from grief, eventually passing away. She died last summer. With no one to care for her or arrange her funeral, her body remained there, came the reply. Long ago, during the Empu era, 1670 to 1683, there was a farmer living with his unusual wife in the small village of Mikoharabara, nestled in a remote mountain valley in the province of Noshu, now Ishikawa Prefecture. She was unusual for several reasons. Firstly, she had fish scales growing under her armpits. Secondly, her nipples were so long that she could throw them over her shoulder and breastfeed while the child lay on her back. Lastly, she possessed extraordinary strength. It was said that the farmer's wife could overpower 4 to 5 grown men on her own. However, even the strongest are not immune to illness. That winter, the farmer's wife fell ill and passed away. 17 days after her death, she returned in the form of a yurei, haunting her husband to his death. No one knew what the farmer had done to incur his wife's curse, but it happened nonetheless. Even after killing her husband, she remained unsatisfied. The yurei of the woman would often appear in the village to threaten and bring misfortune upon the villagers. Finally, a man named Sakuzu, passing through the mountains on business, crossed the village. After hearing the villagers' stories, he wondered if there might be a loophole in the woman's grave. This, he believed, was the reason her restless spirit still haunted the village despite killing her husband. The villagers checked and found a deep hole dug into her grave. Together, they filled it in and covered it with a large stone. Although the villagers did not consider it a permanent solution, it had a certain effect. The woman's hatred immediately transferred to Sakuzu, and she began tormenting him as she had done to her husband. Surrounded, Sakuzu made a pilgrimage to a nearby temple and borrowed a famous sword kept within. The sword was known as a charm against yurei, with the power to subdue vengeful spirits. Sakuzu kept the sword with him and was no longer troubled by the vengeful spirit of the woman. Satisfied that the curse was broken, he returned the sword to the temple. After his business was concluded, Sakuzu began his journey back home, crossing the mountain pass. Not far into his journey, he felt a strange presence approaching from behind. Before he could react, he was lifted off the ground and thrown 10 meters high, falling into the valley below. The impact rendered him unconscious, blooded, and appearing dead. Believing Sakuzu to be dead, the farmer's wife showed satisfaction and vanished, never to be seen again. This story dates back to around 1300 BCE. In Noro province, there is a temple called Kankoji, the place of practice of a monk named Dutu. Originally from Koma province, now the northern part of the Korean peninsula, Dutu was known for his compassion and kindness. Once, seeing travelers struggling to cross the Uji River without a bridge, he used his own savings to build a bridge for everyone to use. This act earned him even greater respect from the people. One day, Dutu had to pass through the Noro mountain valley with his disciple Manryo. By chance, he saw a human skull lying by the roadside. The skull was covered in mud and seemed to have been kicked many times by passing travelers. Only bits of flesh clung to the bones. Feeling sorry for the skull, Dutu turned to Manryo and said, "Look at this pitiful skull, belonging to someone who died and was kicked around. To protect it from such disgraceful treatment, the least we can do now is to place it on a tree branch, away from the feet of passers-by." Following his master's instructions, Manryo picked up the skull and placed it on a tree branch away from the road, covering it with some tree branches. This incident occurred on the last night of the year. Soon after, a man appeared at the gate of Kankoji Temple, requesting entry. "Greetings, venerable sir. I have just descended from the mountains and am eager to meet a man named Manryo. Could you kindly lead me to him?" The man greeted with such politeness and propriety that the gatekeeper directed him to meet Manryo. Though Manryo had never seen the man before, his face had a strangely familiar look. Here's what the man said: "I am deeply indebted to you. You performed a great deed for me, and now I wish to repay your generosity. Although I have nothing with me now, I beg you to come to my house so that I may properly thank you." Despite not understanding anything, Manryo felt the man was genuine in his plea. "How could I refuse such a heartfelt request?" "I will come to your house," Manryo replied. Upon arriving at the man's house, Manryo was treated to a lavish feast. "Please, help yourself to whatever dishes you like best. Indulge yourself." The man urged Manryo to eat heartily. Meanwhile, Manryo wondered what he had done to deserve such a reward. But as he was about to ask, the man immediately deflected by serving Manryo even more delicious dishes. The food seemed endless. Manryo, still a young man, couldn't resist the worldly pleasures and indulged himself. "All right, I will listen to your story later. For now, I will enjoy this feast with you." Afterward, Manryo eagerly devoured the food as enthusiastically as the mysterious man did. In his life, he had never tasted such delicious food and was eager to try everything. Empty plates piled up high on the table. Eventually, even the eagerness had to give way, as Manryo's body could take no more food. While sitting and relaxing, he was startled to see a violent expression on the man's face. "Manryo, venerable sir. My brother, the one who killed me, has arrived. There's no time to lose, we must flee immediately. Come with me." Hearing this, Manryo was frozen with fear. What? What are you saying?" With a trembling voice, the man recounted, "Many years ago, my brother and I worked together in business. Through smooth operations, I managed to save 18 kilograms of gold. Instead of saving anything, my brother believed that killing me would easily gain him possession of the 18 kilograms of gold. My body began to decompose over time in the forest, until there was nothing left but a skull. Passers-by, if they saw me, simply kicked me aside for convenience. It's horrifying. But beyond my expectations, you came and rescued me from the dirt and suffering. I didn't know how to properly repay such a noble act, so tonight I came to the temple to invite you to this feast." Manrio was extremely surprised by the confession, as it seemed too unbelievable. But despite being in a panic and confusion, he also did not want to be captured by the murderous older brother. He stood up to flee. But it was too late. Manrio heard the sound of a creaking door being pushed open, someone stepping in. Manrio stiffened with fear. However, the one who opened the door was not the terrifying older brother, but rather his son accompanying his mother. Seeing Manrio standing in their living room, she screamed in panic, A monk? What are you doing here, in my house?" Manrio then retold every detail of the heart-wrenching story he had just heard. After hearing it, the mother was as shocked as Manrio. It was completely different from what she had been told before. Furious, she looked down at her child and sternly said, "Your father is a despicable man. You must pray for the soul of your murdered uncle and ask for forgiveness for the crimes your father committed." The boy followed his mother's instructions, removing the shadow of his father from his heart and replacing it with reverence for his deceased uncle. In the village of Osaka in the Hida province, now part of Gifu Prefecture, there lived a man named Kaneiman with his family. In front of his house was an old wooden suspension bridge spanning a valley leading to a neighboring village. One night, while inside his house, Kaneiman suddenly heard the distinctive creaking sound of the bridge as someone crossed it, accompanied by whispers. Crossing the bridge at night was extremely dangerous, so Kaneiman hurried out to warn the person, without caring who they were. But he found no one. This continued every night, always the sound of the swaying bridge and whispers. Some nights, he even heard mournful cries and sobbing. Not knowing what to do, Kaneiman sought the help of a fortune teller. The fortune teller told him that the sound was the procession of the dead on their way to Tachiyama, now Toyama Prefecture. Tachiyama was believed to have many paths leading to hell, and recently deceased souls had found the bridge to be a suitable route. Upon hearing this, Kaneiman decided to move his house far away from the bridge, while also arranging a memorial service right at the bridge, pleading for leniency for the tormented souls bound for hell. He also erected a permanent memorial monument at the bridge, and from then on, no more strange sounds were heard. However, the bridge continued to be known to this day as Gatagata Bashi, meaning swaying bridge. If one day you find yourself trekking in the mountains and suddenly overcome by an intense, debilitating hunger to the point of collapse, you might be under attack by the Hidorugami, hungry ghosts. Hidorugami are said to be the souls of those who died of starvation wandering the mountains. Because they died alone without any graves or memorials, their spirits become malevolent, seeking to make others share in their suffering. They mostly appear on mountain trails. Travelers encountering Hidorugami suddenly feel intensely hungry, fatigued, and their limbs numb, a sensation akin to actual starvation. Victims become immobile and often collapse. The attack is a form of possession. Hidorugami enter the victim's body. Without countermeasures, Hidorugami can cause actual starvation even if the victim's body is healthy. After death, victims join the ranks of Hidorugami. Through this, the group of Hidorugami grows and gathers more souls. The method to expel Hidorugami is relatively simple, provided the victim is prepared. Just a small amount of food, mainly rice or grains, can halt the attack, and the hunger will dissipate as suddenly as it arose. That's why even today, travelers are advised not to venture deep into the mountains without carrying a handful of rice or a lunchbox. And if they do, they are cautioned not to eat it all, always leaving some grains as an emergency supply. The Haikyuu Monogatari Kaidankai ghost storytelling sessions and ancient travel guides of Japan are filled with tales of hidorugami. In a story from 1736, a man named Senkichi was found exhausted and unconscious on a mountain path. He couldn't even speak, was put on a cart, and taken back to town for recuperation. Senkichi was believed to be related to an attack by hidorugami. Another typical tale involves a merchant passing through the Noborio Pass towards Onahara. Just hours after finishing his lunch, he felt starvation so severe that he struggled to crawl to a nearby temple. A tourist guide from 1861 warned of the danger of mountain travel without carrying a few handfuls of rice for protection. In the provinces of Kochi, Nagasaki, and Kagoshima, small shrines line the mountain passes and trails to worship hidorugami. Performing a simple offering ceremony at these shrines, sometimes just placing a few small branches to commemorate, is believed to offer protection against hidorugami. Late at night, when you wake up to use the restroom, a mysterious hand suddenly protrudes from the wall and beckons you. Strange as it may seem, when you step into the room where the hand is beckoning, no one is there. It's likely you encountered the yurei of someone who died in that room before. They want something, but only have enough strength to manifest as a solitary pleading hand. These types of stories are quite common in Japan, especially yurei haunting houses. Generally, they desire nothing more than for someone to acknowledge their presence and recite a prayer for them at the local shrine. Manikute no yurei tend to concentrate around houses near shrines or devout individuals who they feel can perform memorial rites. Though they are ghosts, they are among the least harmful types of yurei. Here's a typical story from the Edo period. A temple abbot on his way to Okayama village suddenly hears footsteps behind him. Being particularly sensitive to the supernatural, he immediately discerns it. Ah, that's a lost soul, of someone who died during the terrible famine in the village. It's pitiful for it to still wander around until now. Upon arriving at the village, the temple abbot prepares a Buddhist scripture. Later, he returns to where he heard the footsteps and waits until nightfall. As expected, a ghostly white hand emerges from the darkness. The abbot places the scripture on the eerie hand and begins chanting prayers for the deceased soul. The anonymous yurei then disappears, never to appear again. This is considered one of the most chilling tales, recounting a bloody revenge plot by a blind female ghost musician. Set in the Kyoho era, 1716 to 1736, a samurai named Hotsumi Kanji from Kitakuni province was undertaking his annual journey to the capital in Edo. Along the way, he stopped at a roadside inn to rest. While in his room, he suddenly heard a beautiful voice singing, unlike any he had heard before. It emanated from one of the rooms in the inn. Unbeknownst to him, it was the voice of a goze, a term used to refer to blind women who traveled the country performing with shamisen. Thinking that such a beautiful voice must belong to a correspondingly beautiful woman, Hotsumi resolved to possess her. After locating her room, he concealed himself in the darkness, waiting for an opportunity. When the goze returned, Hotsumi revealed himself from his hiding place and claimed her, yet strangely, the woman did not resist at all. The next morning, Hotsumi was horrified to discover that the woman actually had an ugly countenance, far from the graceful beauty he had imagined. She looked at him with a smile of pure happiness, thinking she had found love at last. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hotsumi quickly devised a scheme and took the woman with him to Edo. On a desolate mountain road, he pushed the ugly blind woman into a ravine to kill her. Thinking he had cleverly resolved the issue, Hotsumi continued on his way. A year later, Hotsumi had completely forgotten about the incident. Once again, it was time for his journey to Edo, and this time, he stopped at a small shrine on the mountain to spend the night. That night, the ghost of the ghost appeared before him. She said, "Have you forgotten the autumn past? You invaded my body and cast me aside like a discarded object. I may not have eyes, but now I see your intentions very clearly." She grabbed hold of Hatsumi's legs and pulled hard, dragging him out of bed. He struggled desperately to free himself from her grasp but could not match the strength of her rage. Hatsumi found himself being dragged into the graveyard of the shrine. Pausing before a tomb, the ghost smirked, then embraced Hatsumi and forcefully pushed him into the earth. The temple monks heard the commotion and rushed to see what was happening. They followed the faint trail to the graveyard. Using shovels to dig, they quickly discovered Hatsumi's body surrounded by the bones of an ugly blind woman. Fate had a cruel twist. Hatsumi had chosen the very shrine where the ghost's body was buried after her remains were found under the mountain ravine. And her soul had been waiting here to claim her betrayer. This is one of the famous ghost stories in Japan, renowned on No and Kabuki stages. During the final stages of Japan's largest civil war, the Haika clan was defeated and scattered. But the ghosts of Japan never accept defeat. It was the year 1185. Minamoto no Yoshitsune stood at the prow of his boat as it sped across Daimotsu Bay in Setsu Province, now Hyogo Prefecture. Yoshitsune was fleeing his older brother, Minamoto no Yoritomo, who had just seized power from the Haika clan and declared himself shogun. Yoritomo viewed his younger brother as a potential threat. By escaping the capital, Yoshitsune hoped to evade the paranoia and jealousy of his brother. But the journey was ill-fated. Yoshitsune had to leave behind his lover, the renowned dancer Shizuka. In their farewell dance, her headscarf fell to the floor. The sea churned. Yoshitsune considered postponing the departure. But Musashibo Benkei, his loyal retainer, pressured Yoshitsune to set sail immediately. Delay would mean Yoshitsune's death at the hands of Yoritomo's soldiers. Initially, the journey proceeded relatively smoothly despite the rough seas. But things took a turn for the worse. As the boat left Daimotsu Bay behind and headed towards Mount Yoshino, a southern fog, without warning, enveloped the vessel. Violent waves crashed against Yoshitsune's boat and retinue, tossing it like a toy. Yoshitsune's boat was trapped, unable to move forward or backward, as if held in place by supernatural forces. A glance over the gunwale revealed the cause. Lurking within the waves were the ghostly white forms of the Haika warriors Yoshitsune had defeated earlier. Their skeletal hands collectively grasped the boat. The only escape for Yoshitsune's boat was through hell itself. Suddenly, one of the spectral warriors leaped onto the boat. In an instant, Yoshitsune recognized him as Taira no Tomomori, the valiant general of the Haika. With glowing red eyes of fury, he brandished his long naginata and charged at Yoshitsune. Unfazed, Yoshitsune calmly drew his sword, prepared to face the warrior of death. But the sage warrior Musashibo Benkei understood that conventional martial prowess could not subdue a spirit. No matter how deadly Yoshitsune's blade, it could not kill that which was already dead. And Tomomori's naginata could kill the living. So Benkei began to kneel, reciting prayers with fervor and devotion to the gods. He beseeched the spirits in all 5 directions, east, west, south, north, and the 5th direction, the realm of mysterious gods. While Yoshitsune and his retinue engaged Tomomori and the vengeful spirits of the Haika, Benkei fought a spiritual battle of faith and reverence, using his prayers to resist the supernatural forces. Thanks to Benkei's earnest and fervent prayers, the raging waves and fog quickly dissipated as suddenly as they had appeared. The vengeful spirits of the Haika vanished, unable to withstand the protective power of the gods. The battle ended,